the Hammer Museum, and then I was sort of part of a auxiliary part of that fair, which was a ironic, if you will, biennial, because it's only going to happen, or it only happened once, and it won't happen again, the Venice Beach Biennial, which I'll show you some photos. I was out on the boardwalk selling my art. I don't want to bore you with too many numbers here, but these are this data I found from a European organization. So it's in euros, but you basically multiply by about 1.3 and you get dollars. So this is the total global art market. This includes auctions, sales of new art, sales of old art. It includes all the auction houses in China, for example, which is a huge driver. So just, we had a big dip, of course, with the recession, but it kind of went back up. So just in the last 10 years, a pretty dramatic increase. They also listed the volume of transactions, which I didn't put in here, but in 2012 there were 35.5 million art transactions that they were reported in the survey. If this number, which is 43 million euros, that equals approximately $60 billion. You divide that by 35.5 million, you get a number. The median price for a work of art changing hands was about $1,600. A slightly smaller example, but one, the world where all of us who are alive, if you're selling art, this is where you operate, the contemporary art market. I only found these 4 data points. It's now, or as of last year, it's about 10% of the total art market. But it went from, in 2003, 593 million euros to 4,469 million euros, so about 4.46 billion euros. If I did my math correctly, that's a 753% increase over the last 10 years. So I couldn't find numbers. I would love to see what it looked like 1970 until present to kind of compare it to these art museum growth and whatnot, but this is the data I could find. Okay. So that's the culture industry. Second point, kind of meanwhile in the rest of the world, not really related, but this is more just something that I think about. This is the worldwide population. So the top row is 1, 2 through 7 billion. This was the year that it's estimated that we hit it, and then this is the time that elapsed between these two numbers goes down here. So we're on a rapid kind of growth curve of population in the world. I'm kind of just sort of inventing this argument. You can take your own. You can of course have your own take on it, but as we go to an ever larger population, it seems like what happens is specialization and professionalization. So you have to there's more, say, competition to be an artist or really in any field. And so it seems to call upon kind of a heightened professionalization, if you will. Okay. Another idea that I'm interested in is the 400 hitter. So kind of a baseball reference. 400 hitter is someone who has a 400 or higher batting average throughout the whole season. The last time it was done was 1941 by Ted Williams. So that was a while ago. There was this, he passed away about 10 years ago, but a paleontologist, evolutionary biologist, and huge baseball fan, Stephen Jay Gould, came up with this argument in the mid-1990s that he was saying, no one can reach this mark anymore in baseball because the overall state of the game has improved. So there used to be these outliers who could just have a really high batting average, like a Ted Williams or a Ty Cobb or these kind of, really these greats in baseball. But as the pitching also improved, statistically, he said everyone in the game got better, which kind of took away the outliers and kind of compressed it. So if we were to extend his argument, say, to the art world, you might say, well, it's really hard now to have someone like a Picasso who is kind of an acknowledged, living sort of master of the art world, kind of the top of the heap. Now we have, probably you could come up with 10 or 15 names of people like a Jeff Koons or a Murakami or Cindy Sherman, all these people that are kind of art world heavyweights who are alive, who are producing work. So I don't know, some people do contest Stephen Jay Gould's proposal. I sort of think it's an interesting way to sort of frame this idea. Professional sports has been undergoing a much more intense professionalization process for, probably since the 50s, since TV and magazines got in the game, so the art world is trailing it by a few decades. Another idea that I'm interested in is kind of this concept of altruism versus selfishness. This was put forth last year by E.O. Wilson, a biologist, in a book that he called The Social Conquest of Earth. He is an expert on ants, and that's where his deepest scientific study has been. However, he came up with some ideas like the idea of biodiversity. Once again, there's a lot of debate around his ideas, and you can find that. But he's kind of putting forth with this book last year, saying that within all of us is sort of the selfishness of the individual, but an understanding that we have to work together as part of a community to get things done. And I think it's kind of an interesting way. For me as an artist, it feels often a tremendously selfish thing to do, where it's very personal and I'm just doing it for myself. But I do think that if you get to that point where when your work crosses over and it's out in public and other people get some enjoyment out of that, then all of a sudden it's that selfishness somehow was worth it, because you're like, I made that thing, but then now it's doing something for someone else. But E.O. Wilson's kind of group theory is that it sort of takes both of these, right? Like if the group itself is altruistic, that group is more likely to succeed. So within the group there could be some selfish actors, but if the overall nature of the community is altruistic, then it continues to grow and prosper. If the whole community is very selfish, then you don't really have a community. Okay, sort of kind of a little joke, but another baseball reference, or sports reference. Like it's pretty clear how to get better as an athlete. You take steroids and you're stronger and whatnot. So I don't really know what that is in art, but I think it might be money. So if money can help you, anyway, it's we all know the pitfalls of that. So I just have this Chris Burden piece, which is a tower of gold bars. Another idea I think about a lot, which is kind of a pop culture sort of thing put forth by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers and others, is this 10,000 hour rule. And it's kind of this idea that it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. So what would that equal? Generally like a studio art class meets about 100 hours a semester. Is that true for this school? And then you're, I don't know. So anyway, let's just say if you're in class and your outside time that you spend on that one studio art class is 150 hours, to do 10,000 hours of study or practice would take about 67 classes. So that's a lot of classes. That'd be about 5 years of full-time work, or because doctor residents work long hours, that's generally about a 3-year doctor's residency. I found this nice quote to kind of go along with that from this Polish theater director. There's no such thing as talent, only the lack of talent. The rest is work. I would say for myself, this kind of 10,000 hour rule, for me, it was about 8 years after I started working with clay that I would say what I could do with my hands kind of caught up with the ideas that I had, or there was some sort of communication between the two where they were in dialogue. The medium, what I knew I could do personally, and then what ideas I had to bring to bear on that. And that 8 years happened about 2 years into grad school. So I spent probably 6 years as a part-time student of art, and then I was 2 years full-time, and that's really where I started the ideas started flowing. So I don't know, I have some belief in this idea. Another thing that informs my work is this kind of dialogue of the craftsman versus the trickster. I don't have a very good image, but you can think of like Hermes / Mercury as kind of a trickster figure. There's trickster figures in myths sort of from all over the world. In Native American culture, often it's a coyote, and the trickster is often kind of an interface between the mortal and the immortal world. Here's this kind of quote I found of what is a trickster. It's a god, goddess, a spirit, a man, a woman, or an anthropomorphic animal who plays tricks or otherwise disobeys normal rules and conventional behavior. Sometimes they break rules maliciously, but usually with the result ends up being positive. Sometimes they even trick themselves. Okay. The flip side of the trickster would be the craftsman, and in this world, in the mythologic world, it would be Vulcan or Hephaestus, who was born with a club foot, so he was kind of a cast off from the gods because he was malformed, and so he was down in his workshop, and he was the armorer and the chariot maker, the craftsman essentially. So here we have a famous painting by Velázquez of Vulcan at his anvil. And I would say a craftsman in a kind of contemporary idea is someone who is responsive to their material. They've invested significant time in acquiring their skills. It's not necessarily someone who works in a traditional craft media. There's a craft to friendship. There's a craft to living, being in contact with your family. There's a craft to software programming. Okay, so you can use it sort of generally in whatever it is you're interested in doing with your life. But I found this great quote from the Italian writer Italo Calvino in his book 6 Memos for the Next Millennium, which is, I think, fairly readable. So I don't know, sometimes these books are pretty jargon-filled. But the quote is, "Vulcan's concentration and craftsmanship are needed to record Mercury's adventures and metamorphoses. Mercury's swiftness and mobility are needed to make Vulcan's endless labors become bearers of meaning." And he goes on shortly after this quote to say that until he put it in these terms, he didn't quite realize that he needed both inside of himself. So it's kind of like you need the altruism at sometimes, and you need the selfishness that's both in there. And then for me personally, the way I make art, I feel that I need both the craftsman and the trickster. And I think you could probably find examples in your own life where that might help kind of illustrate, that you're doing, there are these two sides to the coin. Okay. So, I'm going to take another little break from me talking and play a quick video.
Dude, that's terrible! I told you guys, I've been watching all day. But how did they get away with that? It's a new time. A new era of science that only the smartest can comprehend. What are you talking about? For centuries, alchemists have tried to come up with a formula to make it known. Whoever could do it would, of course, become rich. And now, the chemical equation is right before our eyes. That's the chemical equation for gold? That's right. Guide with cash for gold signs gives you people's unwanted crappy jewelry, which when added to a cable-based shopping network divided by the minted old people equals girls. Hey, you come partly shut up. Oh, I'm an asshole for doing that!
Oh my God, can you believe this? Somebody's about to get this $20,000 topaz and copper ring for just $4,000. We've got our buyer on the line. You buying this as a gift, sir?
No, I'm buying it as a gift for my grandson, Billy.
Grandpa?
Okay. So, if there's a formula for gold, which of course South Park, they're there first on everything. There's maybe, a formula for art. So I have these kind of, these I just kind of invented. So, you could come up with your own formula. So like a market model. In the art market, the perceived value, that equals the price. It's kind of like what people think a thing is worth, that's what it's worth. We all That's what we agree on. So the citation model, which would be like an art historical model. So like artists who copy that artist's art, plus artists that kind of don't directly copy but pay homage to that, times the number of essays that art historians write, that equals that artist's important in art history. And then I think kind of this idea, I'm stealing this directly from another teacher I overheard say a couple weeks ago. He's like, he said, it's easy to know yourself. The hard thing is to accept yourself. And so I guess knowing yourself divided by accepting yourself equals your degree of closeness to making art. So you want to, in this equation, you want to get that equal to 1. So where you're kind of self-aware and you're also comfortable with yourself and with the things that you want to do in your life. You can also kind of apply this. I think it's a useful tool. And I think people might be mad at me for really like grossly simplifying. But Joseph Elbers, it took him a long time to get to this point in his life, at least, where he came up with this, what I think is actually a really brilliant idea. And I love the fact that he made so many, and that you can go in almost any big museum and find a Joseph Elbers square color painting. But it's basically, he took color theory plus squares, and so that equals, Joseph Elbers. You could do that for other people as well, but I'll just now it's time to sort of transition. So I've come up with this formula for my own work, which is, I do other stuff, but this is the main thing that's gotten me some attention. Is probably, partly the reason why I'm standing here in front of you today. And it's this formula, which is plastic vessels remade in clay, plus a colorful glaze. By that I mean I'm not trying to I'm not writing the name of the dairy on there or whatever. I'm just making it a nice glaze. And so that equals what I call bucketry. So for the second part of the talk, I'm going to kind of fill you in on how I got to this formula. So I have these kind of funny, these are some really, really early work. So just if I can back up all the way to the beginning of my life, I was born while my mother was in the second year of her MFA in metalsmithing. So I grew up around art school. I didn't quite realize this until I myself returned to graduate school at the age of 29. I was almost like, oh, this is what I've been searching for my whole life, a return to my childhood. But since my mom was an artist and kind of in the art community, I have these pictures which were from a 1989. Here's my first clay house. My sister and I were the subject of a art education master's thesis. Someone came and worked with us over a series of visits. Tammy, I remember it very well. I was about 9 years old. And so she made art with us and then, wrote her thesis on observations of working with us among other kids. So have some very early work. My mother is more in the craft field, and she, rather than galleries taking your work to a fair, as a kind of in the craft world, you go and set up your own booth. And so here's a photo of me in 7th grade being super bored at the National Gallery of Art in front of some Mark Rothko paintings. I remember my dad being so excited to see them in person, and I was like, I'm tired, and So anyway. So if we can flash forward from that a long way. Basically, I'm kind of skipping over it, but near the end of my undergraduate studies at the University of Kansas, where I mostly was a journalism major, I discovered at a local art center, I took a pottery class, and I immediately fell in love with the wheel and throwing. And I spent many years working on that and made a lot of really bad pots, as generally introductory potters do. And I was kind of at places, I was at the Lawrence, Kansas Art Center for a year. Then I moved to Pasadena, and then I went to Pasadena City College for 2.5 years and had pretty, I would say, relaxed instruction. And so no one was cracking the whip, so I was just kind of doing whatever I want, which I thought was great at the time, but I realized I spent a lot of years just kind of doing the same thing over and over. Here there are some examples of I was making things in response to stoneware crocks. And this is my first kind of thing that I did when I got to graduate school at UCLA, which was, kind of fall back to the potter's wheel. And just to kind of back up on this history once again, just to show you the perils and pitfalls of studying art. So at the end of my undergraduate time, I had done some internships, and I was offered a job, which I turned down in order to follow my girlfriend out here to California. But the job offer was in 2002 was for about $28,000 a year. Now I probably would have received yearly increases, right? But I just want to give you an example, personal example of what actually happened. So throughout this time, I was working retail at a bookstore. I worked at a theater in the ticket office, and I was a part-time community college student. And then around 2005, I started going to Cal State Long Beach. And then I applied to grad school, and then I worked full-time for 9 months, which is why my income went up to just about $22,000. And then I went to grad school, so you can imagine what happens then. So, it's despite the booming art market, I was nowhere a participant in that. None of this money comes from selling art. Okay, so I was kind of a potter guy. I got down to Long Beach and was sort of challenged to expand kind of my ideas of what I was doing. Tony Marsh, the professor there, put it in really sort of a formula in a way, which I remember. I showed him my work, which was just some pots, and he said, you're doing a very simple equation. You're doing 1 and 1 equals 2. He said, here at Long Beach, we are looking for more complex equations. And it was a very nice way of saying, you're not doing anything interesting yet, but keep working. And so there was a lot of dialogue there at the ceramic studio about the mark of the hand. And so I was like, well, how do you make something not with your hand? So can I make a plate with my head? And so that's what I'm doing right here. And then that's what it looked like. Kind of gross. You can see the hairprint, that you're eating off of. But still pottery related. I did this project where I washed dishes to kind of, I was like thinking about what does it mean to once again work with your hands. Here I'm washing a handmade, this is at my parents' house, I'm washing a bowl made by Clary Ilian, who's a relatively well-known potter from Iowa and has a nice book about throwing. I made these self-portrait planter pots. This is made from plaster molds and slip cast and terracotta, and then I planted some native California trees in it. I thought it was a nice project, and then I gave these away to friends as gifts, and it's kind of one of these things I like forced this art on them and didn't really follow up. So most of the trees just died. So kind of it looks nice maybe here, but it didn't really, as an actual project, I didn't follow through on it. So I kind of started with grad school and then went backwards a bit, but now we're back here. This is 2009, so about 4 years ago. And if you remember, I showed you work from 2 years before this. That was those kind of thrown crocks that I was making that were in response to the sort of 19th century American stoneware crockery. That kind of blue and white, salt glazed. You can, I should put some images on here, but I don't have any. But anyway, I got to thinking, well, 5-gallon buckets are the contemporary equivalent of a crock. They're very functional, they're useful, you can store things in them, you can flip them upside down and use them as a stool or step on them. They're lightweight, relatively durable, kind of a lot of these things that ceramics is not. It's durable, but it's fragile, it's heavy, and so I started making these 5-gallon buckets. And I think one thing I would say, it really, this is where kind of trusting your peer group of fellow art students can be really valuable. This was the kind of first time I started bringing these back to the graduate studios at UCLA, and immediately people saw them and they were like, oh, and this had never happened to me before. They were like, oh, hey, do you want to trade for one of those? And so I was like, oh, okay, there's something going on here. Like, people are interested in these. I enjoyed making them. I thought they were funny, but they're also this, you go to a ceramic studio and there's all kinds of plastic buckets in there. So kind of a self-reflective sort of look at what I was doing in the ceramic studio. At the same time, I came up with this idea. I was still interested in throwing and making functional ware, but it seemed, at this point, I've, about 8 years into working as an artist, and I felt like, gosh, I've pretty much, in a way, I felt like I'd wasted my entire 20s because nothing, I was at a good school, but nothing was happening really, and so I just felt, in a way, very futile. So I came up with this idea of the, futility limited was my pottery line. And mostly, rather than actual pottery, it took the form of advertisements for the pots. So, and they're just kind of these sort of insider, really terrible, they're not even jokes because no one's laughing, but this is like a Rauschenberg quote where he was like, I want to break down the wall between art and life or something like that. So I was like, I'm going to rebuild this wall, between pottery and life. If you take poetry and move the E around and add another T, that's pottery. And then I'm a big pyro, which I think is why I like ceramics so much. So anyway. And then shortly before my thesis show, at UCLA they do 2 open studios a year, which is twice as many as every other school. I think it's actually really valuable. It forces the students to kind of think about what a public audience would do. And so I had been trying to make these huge tiles out of clay. And so I don't know if you haven't tried to make tiles, one really effective way is you put it between 2 pieces of drywall to keep the edges from curling. But it just made the drywall all moldy in a really interesting way. So then I just proceeded to mold up a bunch of drywall, and I took everything out of my studio and covered the walls with this moldy drywall. And so once again, it's sort of related to my work with clay, but it sort of manifested itself in a different form. And I was like, oh, this is like my way to make like an abstract painting or something. And it also felt kind of like, thinking about these myths, like the deal with the devil pact, this kind of sort of myth that's can be, I think, really effective. Like I can tell you John Baldessari, the, LA art kind of grandfather these days, his story is he had been trying to be a painter, and he wanted to make a break from that, and he burned all of his paintings, and that was like a break with his past, although I believe he actually kept some of them. But this, like, kind of clearing out my studio, not showing anything out of clay, it was kind of like, okay, fresh slate and start over, forget everything in the past and move forward with this sort of new body of work. So then a few months later I had my thesis show, and there were 2 things with that. I gave away these rulers, which were the length of my right arm, and I called that length 1 Merkel. And this was, I'm right-handed, so it's kind of like my main tool, if you will, for throwing or otherwise. But it's also, this way to kind of responding to these trends in the art world. I was like, well, if I brand myself and give away a promotional product. And so here at the opening, everyone had these Merkel rulers. And it kind of, I didn't quite realize, how it was sort of going to take over the actual event. Not the subsequent days when it was just open, but the actual night of the opening. I think my fellow students who showed with me were like, you jerk, like, why did you do that, So anyway, so I gave away about 300 of those rulers there. I ripped them down, made them myself, ripped them from Home Depot 2x12s, screen printed them. But the main thing I did was I made this collection of trash cans. So it's kind of expanding on the idea of the 5-gallon bucket, but blowing it up to a bigger plastic object turned into clay. These are just the kind of Rubbermaid Brute trash can, kind of a standard, really classic, really beautiful, simple shape. These were done in low fire glazes. Later I moved to making them out of stoneware, which is high fire. Okay, so yeah, trash cans. It was funny, I had a trash can in the show at Jane Deering's gallery in January, and she had some artist talks in conjunction with the show, and after my talk I had a gentleman come up to me and he was like, I like your milk crates. He's like, I just can't get around the idea of the trash can as art. So I was like, okay, I didn't I mean, I feel like I'm like one of the, fairly conservative, but sometimes it depends on your audience who's boundaries you're pushing, I guess. Later in 2010, I was invited to do this show at Los Angeles Project. Kind of a nice tie-in is that, as I found out later, the main funder for Los Angeles Projects was Jack Black. So that was kind of cool. It was a nonprofit space. So the way a lot of these nonprofit spaces, artist-run spaces work is they give you the space, but no money to realize your project. They had a cancellation. I was a fill-in, so it was kind of last minute, too late to write any grants. And so I was like, okay, I really want to do this show about, kind of about Devil's Tower, America's first national monument, which made famously an appearance in Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And the guy goes crazy with this vision of the Devil's Tower, which has kind of been implanted there by the aliens or something, but he's making it in mashed potatoes, and he makes it in dirt and clay, so that clay reference was like enough for me. But I thought, okay, the other ideas, like I was trying to kind of, in a way, poke fun at these, like a King Tut, like you take these treasures from another country and you take them on tour. So I was like, can I take, America's treasures, which are like our national parks and national, kind of like the wilderness, the Grand Canyon or whatever, like, can you take that on tour? So I took it on tour to LA, and I had posters advertising the show, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to pay for it all and just break even. I'm going to sell, ceramic, gift shop items. But I actually I spent, I don't know, about $3,000 on all the clay and straw bales. Here's how we made it. Just unfired clay. A lot of friends, if you give people free clay, they like to play with it. Urs Fischer is just doing this big show that's going to open this weekend at Mocha, and they've burned through, I think, 160 tons of clay, and anyone could come down and make stuff. So I was like, oh, I wish I'd thought of that, but anyway. So I made the Devil's Tower, made the posters, referencing the Close Encounters marketing material, but also being like, hey, come buy my tower sculpture. These are ink wash, various colors or grades of wash on watercolor paper. And then I had the gift shop. These were $20 each. I still have like so many of them in my garage. I should have brought some, I made postcards, hand painted. So, but yeah, I think I only made about $800. So I didn't even come close to breaking even. So once sort of futile effort on that. I mostly want to just show you kind of solo shows I've done, but this was a fairly important group show for me. Kind of helped launch my career in a way. Because not too many people saw the show at Los Angeles Projects. Los Angeles Projects was only there for about 2 years, and then as these things do, it kind of went away. So, not too many people knew about it. But Acme is a more established gallery and has been around for about 20 years, and so more people kind of saw it. So I made some more trash cans. These are stoneware, high fire glazes. And then I made a mold of a KitchenAid stand mixer. My idea with this is kind of, there was a bowl there, so that was enough. It was a vessel. I thought, okay. But it's also this idea, like being useless in a way in the world. An art object really has, the function of an art object, I would argue, is to be looked at and to be talked about. And that is, I think, a fairly important thing, but it's not, it's like people need their food and shelter and jobs, before they can have the space of mind to kind of contemplate art objects. So in a way, I think also this relates to, a lot of people have these KitchenAid mixers. They're very, the actual mixer is very beautiful, highly designed, classic, but it functions more as a symbol of, oh, hey, I'm a domestic person. I'm interested in cooking. I have this beautiful thing sitting on my counter, but I don't use it. I have friends that they put their mail in it, So I was like, if you just need a non-functional thing, I'm good at that, I'll give you something that won't work for its intended purpose. So I made these, and then I also that shows the first time that I showed the milk crates. So these were the first 3 milk crates that I made, and you know, what it was like for me, it was just like, okay, I did 5-gallon buckets, I did trash cans, okay, what's next? Milk crates, they're really beautiful, they're functional. And I think too is realizing, I was teaching a class down at Long Beach, and I saw one, and I realized there was a date on it, and they had this thing, and it was all duct taped together, but the date said June 66, and I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, this milk crate is 40 some years old, you know, and it still works for something. And I found that to be really kind of inspiring and beautiful, so I wanted to recreate it. So I thought it was just kind of in line with that, but it sort of, you know, I got lucky, I would say. It kind of hit a nerve, and it was a little bit off to the races with it. I started getting some commissions and invitations to show them other places, and so that year I was actually a stay-at-home dad for most of that year, so I was taking care of an infant, and then when he was napping or at night, I was sitting there at our kitchen table and cutting these things out, and then taking them in to a studio and firing them. These are made with paper clay, low-fire paper clay, commercial glazes for the most part, although I have switched to making some of them out of porcelain and stoneware. I invent my own patterns sometimes, but I just go on eBay and find pictures of milk crates that are interesting now, and I just copy them. There's a lot of, you know, the industrial designers have been having fun with these things for years, so I'm just kind of celebrating that and copying them. I have to make some modifications to make it work in clay. Basically less detail. Here's one I made my own. This is like the crates that they deliver water, the office water jugs in. These are some porcelain milk crates. Okay, so like I said, kind of a formula. Kind of discovered my own formula. This continued with a solo show at Acme. Later that group show was in January, so almost at the end of the year I had a show. And I made a price list for it. And this was echoing this price list from the Syracuse Stoneware Company. So kind of taking it back, kind of really explaining in a way to people, hey, the roots of these are me looking at stoneware crocks. And here's what these price lists used to look like. So I'll just, you know, I'll make my own and put the prices right there, the different styles. For this show, I added these water carriers and gas cans, laundry hampers, styrofoam cooler, you know. So this is the blue big mouth bucket, which is often, you know, is really useful throwing on the potter's wheel. And I just installed it on the floor, no pedestals, just sitting right on the concrete floor. Tried to, you know, get a mix of colors and glazes. I also made these triangle milk crates, so I think I invented that. I don't think they actually exist in plastic. I also made these, the taller, skinnier things. I call those 10-gallon buckets. So it's a little bit like, I was like, I need some taller things, not just trash cans. I need some taller things for the installation to make it work, but I also was trying to make these things, inventing my own. I was so deep into the plastic industrial design vessel world that I was like, let me invent my own vessels and see if anyone notices. Here's the Eagle 1-gallon Eagle brand gas cans, water carrier, styrofoam cooler. Here's the triangle milk crates. Okay, and then I was invited to do kind of a larger version of this at the Nerman Museum of Art, which is a museum at a community college in Overland Park, Kansas. And so you can see some of the same works, but it's, you know, grown by it's about twice as big. And actually, strangely enough, the way I got invited to do this show, there'd been a review of my work in the LA Times. That review, it wasn't written by Christopher Knight, who's the main critic, but he posted it on Facebook. Bruce Hartman, who's the director of this museum in Kansas, saw the image and read the article and liked the work and got in touch with me via the gallery. So it's kind of, I was like, whoa, Facebook show, kind of funny. Okay. I know we're getting close to the end here, so I'll just kind of zoom through. I added these larger gas can forms, 5 gallons. Here's another different kind of vertical 5-gallon form. And then I mentioned this before, I was a part of the Venice Beach Biennial last summer on the Venice Beach Boardwalk. So I had a stand. So once again, I'm making just really terrible, it's all I got is really bad jokes. So you need to make, any potter, you need an empty void to have a vessel. So I made these sunglasses where, you put them on and you can't see anything, so you're staring, into the void or whatever. It's just all, So try and have fun, but just, there's also, of course, these are you go to Venice Beach, the boardwalk, and you can get all your cheap, $8 copy of Ray-Bans or other, so I was like, I'll make copies of the cheap sunglasses and, and then I also had these are like 6-pack rings and 3-pack rings. So like beach trash. I had these devil towers. I was trying to pawn them off, Made postcards. And then I had this where I called it Merkel Craft Art and Novelties, which was a play on kind of some things that George Orr, who was a turn of the 19th century American potter, had done. He also called himself the second Palissy. Bernard Palissy was a 16th century French potter. So I was like, well, I don't think anyone's claimed it yet, so I'll call myself the third Palissy. But I'll also call myself the second Tupper. So there's Tupperware, and then now I have my pottery line, which is no longer futility limited. Now it's Merkelware. So anyway, I don't, Then I got all these lyrics, song lyrics about Earth and about sunglasses. But I was playing off, here's George Orr and his promotional stuff when he went to the World's Fair. So he called himself the greatest art potter on earth. He said, the potter said to clay, beware, and it was. So this is kind of, I look to these earlier precedents, I guess somewhat ironically, but also somewhat, I don't know. I mean, it's just the way, I think it's funny. I want to work with it. Here's George Orr after his studio burned down with his family, and his kids are all sitting inside pots. And so when my son was, he's about 2.5 now, but here's a little guy. I stuck him inside some bowls that I made, some of the functional stuff. Here's Bernard Palissy, just to show if you haven't heard of him. These were all cast from nature and clay put together. Okay. And then just to kind of conclude here, I have 2 upcoming solo shows in June. So I'm just in the midst of heavy production on those shows. At Acme, I'm making ceramic anvils. So this kind of is a continuation of making non-functional objects, rendering them useless in a way. You couldn't hammer anything, you would just break it. But also trying to, give it a cool glaze and make it look good, make it look interesting. Here's a different one. And then I also have a show coming up at Salon 94 Freeman's in New York. And that show's called Hereafter. It's sort of like Bucketry 3. Kind of adding some new things, like this water jug, more gas cans, Mr. Potato Heads. So it's kind of partly looking at funerary art from around the world, from Central America, from Egypt. A lot of our record of ceramics comes through in funerary art. So just trying to make my own version of that, like little figurines that'll help me in the afterlife or whatever. I don't know. Here's a roast chicken container from the supermarket. This is a 99-cent store watering jug. There's another one. So these kind of like sort of the idea of like spirit animals, but I got the 99-cent store version. There's my Tony Marsh, like Mr. Potato Head, if you know his work. milk jug, 1984 Bose Soundwave. I found on eBay, I found the smaller version of this can I've been also casting in the 5-gallon version. Gatorade cooler. I've been going crazy making molds. Like all I do now is make plaster molds, it seems like. Here's a 100-ounce takeout or a to-go cup. You know, because everyone needs 100 ounces of soda when you're on a long haul. Vintage Mr. Dustbuster, or Dustbuster. Okay, 1950s Oster Beehive blender, a real classic design. The first version of this blender, I think, came out in the 1930s, and it's kind of, you know, if you look, they've slowly evolved and tweaked it and changed it. Two-liter soda, deodorant, because you need that. So, in conclusion, I don't really have a very good conclusion, but I think to kind of wrap up kind of the entire talk from the beginning, I think that you know, this sort of like ironic detachment from everyday life, which I think comes pretty natural to me. Like it's very easy for me to kind of like make these, you know, it's like the only moves, as you see, I can make are referencing other things, and I don't know if that's, you know, it's like if I've pushed through, if I've just done that over and over and just hammered that so deep that I've like sort of passed through the ironic stage into something else. But I think that you know, I would encourage you in your own life to kind of think about that and be aware of, you know, do you speak directly, or do you speak with like you know, pop culture references all the time, and what that means for how you function and operate in the world. So it's more, I guess I'm just saying this is something, you know, people say to me, oh, your work is just ironic, right? And I'm like, well, I don't think so, but I guess, you know, if I look at it, I can see why people would think that. So I'm kind of speaking partly to myself and trying to offer some, you know, words of advice without being overly preachy. So that's kind of the overview I've got, and I think we have a little bit more time. I'm happy to take any sort of question, either from the audience or, you know, afterwards if you want to stand in the hall, and, you know, we can talk all night. So thank you very much. Yeah. Well, the anvils are hand-built stoneware, but a lot of the things, you know, since I'm copying kind of commercially made products and sort of celebrating their design and, you know, and just like trying to say like, you know, like you look at Mr. Potato Head and it's really, they're well-designed toys, you know, for what they are, and they're able to produce them cheaply, and I think it's great that people can have them in their home. And so I'm kind of celebrating it, but I'm also like, what does that mean when I translate it into this different material, which, you know, plastic will be around for a long time, but it won't be, you know, we have ceramic objects that are 10,000 years old. You know, whether mine will last that long, I don't know, but they have the potential, you know, to just keep once you've fired something, it's like you've created a rock. So what does that mean to you know, what objects do I turn into like these permanent rocks in a way? So I've been doing a lot of casting of those things just to make them as exact as possible.
And the milk crates are slab?
The milk crates are slab, yeah. I have the slabs, they're pre-cut to the 5 different sides. I add slip and score and add strips of the pattern, and then I cut back through, cut all the open areas, and then let it stiffen up and just, you know, make a slab box with mitered corners and lots of slip and put it together. It's very like, it's laborious, but it's like straightforward, like pretty, you know, pretty straightforward like ceramic processes.
How do you go about making trash cans?
Oh, the trash cans are made, so I have a multi-part mold, and I can kind of stair step the mold up, and they're just slabs, and I beat it in there. I have a sock with a bag of sand inside, and I slap all the slabs together. And then once I build it up, I start unpacking the mold almost right away because it shrinks down and, yeah. Press molded.
So did you scale them up?
I did not, no.
We have one question here and then.
I was just going to ask, do you see the anvils that you're working on as this joining of mercury and Vulcan, that idea you're talking
Sure,
about?
yeah,
Getting
definitely.
the perfect mix of the tricksters.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a little bit, so Acme Anvils was a brand from Sears. It was then famously used in Looney Tunes. Acme, the word itself, means the best or the paragon. But then, of course, I haven't asked them. The owners think it's funny and they're into what I'm doing. They had to give me the thumbs up. You don't really have much freedom as an artist. But they, of course, had to know there was a Looney Tunes reference. So I think, it's like with a lot of my work, I know there's kind of like this bad joke or this one-liner there. And there's so many artists and so many things going on. I hope that one-liner draws the viewer in. They're like, haha, that's funny. But then they're like, oh wait, what does this mean? Where does the anvil show up in art, and in mythology? And so hopefully there's more there. I mean, it's not super deep. We can kind of list those few bullet points, and that's what's there in my mind. But yeah.
But you want
I hope they do, So I think it's like you have to, but you don't want to if I could put up this big text and tell people, but you want to leave it open-ended so that people can draw their own conclusions, It's like, there's nothing I hate more than when I walk into a show and they're like, I'm telling you what to think. And it's like, no, don't tell me. Don't tell me anything, I'm selfish that way. I want to decide what I think about the work, So I try and give that to people too. I hope. So. Yeah.
The reason that you make all these casts and stuff, because you want to be like a little kid who draws on the wall, and you're like, well, I want to add squash to that. You think that's what you draw, do you do it in a way?
I guess I don't know. I mean, it started a little bit it started with the buckets and the trash cans, so it was very much reflecting on this process of what goes on in the ceramic studio and how ceramics is made today. We need these ceramic buckets. And so I got sort of, people were interested in that idea. And so in a way, I kind of became like the bucketry guy, the milk crate guy, I mean, to a certain extent. I'm not super well known, I would say, but the people who do know my work may think that I'm a little bit of a one-trick pony, right? So I kind of decided to just keep going down that path. And so I'm going a little bit further with this upcoming show in New York, but for the most part, I'm sticking to plastic vessels. So they're still an object, although, yeah, it's a stretch to say a stereo is a vessel or that a Mr. Potato Head is a vessel, but they're kind of things that are molded out of plastic. And they're kind of I would like to think it's a reflection of the way we live today. I mean, plastic comes because it's sort of a cheap byproduct of producing gas, and we're in a petroleum-based economy, and so there's all this gas being extracted, and then there's plastic, and that's the way we live today. So, I mean, I have my thoughts and ideas about that, but in a way, I'm just trying to kind of mirror it and turn it back and say, this is what we are. This is the way we're living. I find a lot of plastic objects really attractive and sexy. I understand the appeal, but then when I stop and think about it, it's like, oh, what are we doing with, all these disposable objects and whatnot? So it's all in there, and I'm kind of, like I said, I'm trying to not really be too preachy about it in the way I exhibit it, just sort of say, here are these things. I find them fascinating. I myself have mixed feelings about them, and it's up to the viewer. But in terms of kind of like a